welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into this really fascinating idea from a Christian text called the father as prophet. We're going to unpack what it actually means for a father to take on this prophetic role and explore the pretty unique responsibilities that come along with it. Okay, so here's what we're covering. First up, the prophet's role itself. Then we'll get into representing by example, leading through teaching, and finally, communicating and protecting. Let's get into it. All right, first things first. To really get what it means for a father to be a prophet, the source draws this really important line in the sand. It sets this role apart from another, maybe more familiar spiritual job. So the source poses this question, right? What does it mean for a father to be a prophet? And it does this to make a clear distinction between being a prophet and being a priest. Now, it says a father can totally be both, but it really argues that this prophetic role, well, it has this incredibly powerful and direct impact on the family. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. Think about it. As a priest, the text says, a father represents his family to God. He's speaking on their behalf. But as a prophet, it's the complete opposite. He represents God to his family. And that's not just about what he says. It's about his actions, his example, his whole vibe, really. Okay, so let's dig into that first, and honestly, maybe the most foundational role of all. How a father's example literally shapes his kid's picture of God. And the source puts a huge weight on this. It basically says that when a father is loving and compassionate and just there, he's doing more than just being a good dad. He's actively living out this prophetic role, He's painting a true picture of who God is for his kids. But, and this is a huge but, the source immediately flips the coin. The stakes here are incredibly high, because if a father is bitter or super critical or just not around, the text warrants he can create this really twisted and damaging idea of God in his kids' heads. And that's a misconception that can be almost impossible to fix later. The source actually has a name for this specific kind of damage, the wound of rejection. And it's described as way more than just, being sad. It's this deep inner wound that makes a child feel like they're not whole, like they're unwanted, and it all stems directly from that lack of a father's love. And what's pretty wild is how the text connects the single emotional wound to this whole range of problems. I mean, look at this. It's everything from the passive stuff, like depression and just a total lack of motivation, all the way to the really active symptoms, frustration, anger, even violence, and just rejecting any kind of authority. And just to show how devastating this misrepresentation can be, the source includes this, it's a gut punch of a quote from a young man. The argument here is that his father's behavior had so completely warped his view of God that it ended in this deep, painful hatred. Now, the other side of that example coin is discipline. And the source warns it's like a tightrope walk. Lean too far one way, too little discipline, and you get rebellion and kids who are irresponsible. But lean too far the other way, too much discipline, and you just crush their spirit, leaving them feeling worthless and like they can never do anything right. So a good example is crucial, right? But according to this text, it's not enough. Not even close. It argues that a father also has to be an active teacher, literally weaving spiritual ideas into the day-to-day fabric of family life. And to back this up, the text points to this verse from Deuteronomy. The argument is that this kind of teaching isn't supposed to be some formal, once-in-a-while thing. Nope, it's a primary responsibility. The whole point is that it's continuous, it's informal, and it happens all day long. So what does that actually look like? Well, it translates into some super practical advice. The source is basically saying, don't quarantine faith to just one day a week. Instead, make it a totally natural part of your conversations, pray together about real family decisions, and just integrate it into everything. And to really hammer this home, the source tells this incredible story. You've got a mother, 8 adopted girls, and they are out of money and food. But instead of panicking, she just tells her kids, well, we've got nothing for breakfast. I guess we better pray. So they do. And then food shows up. The source concludes that seeing that one prayer answered taught those kids more about God than a dozen Sunday school lessons ever could. It's that real life experience. Okay, so this whole idea of teaching flows right into the final roles the source lays out. Communication and this is where it gets pretty dramatic, protection. The text actually calls this the prophetic spirit in action. And of course, you can't teach anything if you can't communicate, right? The text suggests that the best, deepest conversations happen in those casual, informal moments, while you're gardening or fishing or just hanging out. But the biggest principle here, listen more than you talk. And when they do talk, listen without looking shocked. You gotta create that safe space where they know they can tell you anything. And that brings us to what is easily the most intense function in the whole text. It argues that a father can actually develop a kind of sensitivity to danger. It calls it a prophetic spirit that lets him protect his family. The comparison it makes is to Noah being warned about the flood and acting on it. To show what this looks like, the source tells this story. Picture this. A family is driving in their van. The mom, for whatever reason, decides not to sit in her usual spot in the front passenger seat. Instead, she sits in the back with the kids. And then, bam, a huge lump of concrete gets dropped from an overpass and smashes right through the windshield, right where she would have been sitting. The inside of the van is covered in glass, but because that seat was empty, everyone was okay, totally uninjured. Then there's a second story, and this one's even more direct. A father named Malcolm just gets this bad feeling, this sense of danger hanging over his family. So he tells his daughter, hey, this morning, I really think you should take my car, not your mom's. Well, later that day, she hits a patch of oil and gets into a horrible crash. She was critically injured, but she survived because of the airbag in her dad's car. Her mom's car didn't have one. The text says the accident would have probably been fatal otherwise. So let's just recap. The source lays out these 4 really interconnected roles of the prophet father. Number 1, example, representing God through love and discipline. 2, teaching, making faith a part of everyday life. 3, communicating, keeping that two-way dialogue open. And 4, protecting, being sensitive to those gut feelings of danger and acting on them. And all of this really leaves us with one big question to chew on, doesn't it? What are the broader implications of a model like this, one that places such an immense level of spiritual responsibility squarely on one parent? What does that mean for the family, for good and for bad?